Thanks, Carl. Can you all hear me? Terrific. Now, I first need to say that I was actually at the hospital last night till 3 a.m. in the morning. So if I'm not making much sense, unfortunately my father had a fall and broke his nose and his elbow last night. So I've had very, very little sleep. So give me about this much leeway if you can. So look, I'm going to actually make this a lot more personal and I suppose anecdotal. I actually grew up in Outback Australia. From whenever I was young, my mother would always say to me whenever I was playing up, she'd say, "You're making a mistake, Stephen. You're just doing stuff from your level of experience." And it wasn't until many, many years later that really gelled with me and I truly understood it. And even to this day, it's one of the things when I have training sessions within the real estate company that I bring to people's attention is that it's very, very difficult to do more than what you're experienced in. And my mother used to always say to me as well is that you show me somebody that's got limited beliefs about things and I'll show you someone that's got limited experience. So I had the benefit of actually being trained by a guy in South Australia by the name of Michael White. Michael White had the highest success rate with anorexics and people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And that was absolutely enlightening for me to see the way that he actually worked with people. And he sort of frontiered this thing called narrative therapy. And interestingly enough, it was tied in with that people live their lives by the stories that they've got about their lives. And generally, these dominant stories about their lives are what tend to be what restrains people. And that sort of understanding for me, it meant a great deal for me. I was actually involved in that training. And one of the things that's interesting about sort of pivotal and seminal information is that once you're exposed to it, it's very, very difficult to be yourself after it. It changes you. So it was interesting that through the process of that training, and I'd like to just share some stories with you that meant a great deal to me. I'll cover these three areas and you'll see a lot of overlay from what Chris said, but in a very different, much more personal way. So I'll never forget a session when I was working with Michael White and he'd come across this woman that was actually an anorexic and she'd seen every single specialist on the east coast of Australia, psychotherapists and psychologists. And Michael White wanted to work with her in a different way, in this narrative way or this systems thinking based way. And her mother actually brought her in a wheelchair. She was about 30 kilos and she was just sitting in a wheelchair and rocking. And I was actually behind reflecting glass, which is the way that he actually worked. And the girl's mother was behind her in the wheelchair, and in the back of the wheelchair there was a pile of all the files from the doctor's notes. And you know, you're sitting there exposed to this sort of thing, you're just not sure what's going to actually happen. So she brought her in and the mother started talking, and the mother was talking and saying things like, "Oh, when she was at North Shore, and doctor tells her, and it was because of what happened when she was in this, and it was because of that I think it's this, and that's why she keeps doing what she's doing." And then when Debbie was like 12 in school, she got bullied by these people, and then Michael White just sat on the other side of the table and he didn't speak. And she went on for about 7 or 8 minutes, and we were sitting there waiting for him to speak and wondering what he was going to do, because this guy was the best at what he did. It's always good to try and be trained by people who are the best at what they do. They're getting the results that you want to get. Anyway, after about 6 minutes, and she finally realised that she was the only one that was speaking, she stopped speaking. And Michael White got up from his desk and looked at her and put his hand next to all the files that she'd put on the table and just pushed them onto the floor. And he walked towards the door, and I thought, the hell is he doing? And he said, "That's the end of today's session." But the girl in the wheelchair went, because it hadn't happened before. Much, much later, I worked out after I was trained by Michael that what he'd done was actually a pattern break. And the pattern break's designed to erode the dominant story about people's lives. And he also worked through many other ways. I saw a series of things that happened where he was expressing genuine surprise in relation to one day their car broke down and she'd managed to get herself on the tram and get herself to the counselling session with her mother, which is something that just hadn't happened before. And they'd come into therapy, and Michael White was a very, very dramatic and charismatic sort of guy, and he'd be walking around the room and he'd say, they came into the room, and even before they spoke, he got that information from the receptionist that that's what had happened. And he was like, "Well, I just don't understand it. I'm just not sure how that possibly could be. I've heard from my receptionist that Debbie actually managed to get here this morning and actually get on a tram, and that doesn't seem to fit with what was happening. I don't understand how she's managed to do that. It kind of makes me wonder kind of makes me wonder what else might be possible. I'm just very confused and surprised by it. That's the end of today's session. He worked with people in a way that actually, which is what I have subsequently been trained in, is that people think that you make decisions intellectually. You actually make decisions, and decisions of change emotionally. It's in times of emotional intensity. It's often the same in life, that often you can be exposed to a plethora of information, and sometimes just that one piece of information that actually makes you change your mind. I'm sure that we've all been involved historically in things like a bad relationship, or it could be a bad business. And your friends and your colleagues and your family say, this is not good for you, you're not yourself, you need to stop doing that. And it's blatantly obvious. And the funny thing about that is that intellectually you understand it as well. You know that it's true. Let's use a relationship, an actual relationship example. I'm sure that we've all been in a relationship that's not good for us, and we know that we're not the person that we were. But you stay, and you stay, and you stay, and you stay, and you don't leave. And your friends talk to you, and you know what they're saying to you is true at an intellectual level, but it's not hooked up at an emotional level yet. And this goes on for months and months and months, and they say the same thing, and nothing changes at all. And then one day you actually wake up, and now all of a sudden you can leave. And the only thing that's changed is that you now believe that whatever is outside of that relationship is better. But until you believe that, your behaviour doesn't change. It doesn't change at all. So in that regard, and you'll see elements of this from what Chris said, part of getting more of what you want is firstly knowing what it actually is, but it's also letting go of things that you believe. Because if you want a different behaviour or a different result, the answer clearly lies in doing something that you haven't done already. And I suppose that's what my training is actually in. But let me show you what that looks like. So after 9 years of, and I'm going to move now onto my business, my IT business, but I just want to give you a couple of those little anecdotal stories from my background so you get an idea of how I'm trained and the way that I actually think in a life-changing way. So I actually managed to sit in front of, as Gail said, over 1,000 people in family therapy who wanted to be here, and they were here. And that obviously involved a series of things of, well, what are you prepared to do that you haven't done already? And what are you prepared to let go of that's not helping you get to this point? And when would you like to start? And so that sort of thinking, that sort of systems thinking. So after about 9 years of that, I completely burned out, and I thought, I'm going to get selfish, I'm going to do something for myself. So really, I was really a family counsellor is what I was, but I was taking it home and I was dreaming about it, and I thought, well, I've become very experienced in taking people from here and getting them to there. What if I took that understanding of how change happens and applied it to business? What would it look like? If you supercharged it, what would it look like? So now I'll tell you very, very quickly. In 1997, a friend of mine showed me the internet, and I was just overwhelmed by it, completely overwhelmed by it, because what I could see was a system, and I knew there was one piece of information in one place, but it meant you could access it from lots of different places around the world instantaneously, and I just got overwhelmed with excitement. The problem was I'd never used a computer, and I couldn't type, I didn't know how to turn the computer on, but that didn't matter. Didn't matter at all. So over the space of the next 3 months, I got my computer, I'd set it up, I'd learnt, for anyone that's actually old enough, this is back in the days when you had a dial-up modem and it goes to connect, and then it connects and it drops out. And you can't. But after about 12 weeks, I managed to teach myself to send an email and to open a web browser. And so I thought I was the bee's knees. I thought, well, this is fantastic. But geez, that was frustrating. And then I thought to myself, well, maybe it's frustrating for other people. Perhaps I could build a business out of this. So this is how someone that's trained in systems thinking, that's had 1,000 people in family therapy, that's helped them get to a place as quickly as possible at the minimum cost without going broke and without ruining themselves. This is what they do. This is how they think. What can I do right now? How can I get this message out there that I think that you might be suffering with connecting to the internet and you might need some help with it, and what would I be able to charge to do that? And how can I do it at the minimum cost so that I don't go broke in the meantime? And how can I actually do something to take action with it right now? What could I do? Oh, I don't know. Yes, you do. Make out something that's got a gun in your head, and you've got to come up with an idea now how you can make as much contact with as many people that might have suffered like you, because you think that this internet thing's possibly going to get big. So what could you do right now? So I got in my car and I drove to the newsagent, I bought a piece of fluorescent cardboard, and I drove onto Tuggeranong Parkway and I stuck it up on the sign. I wrote, "Internet for beginners." And my phone number. Now remember, 12 weeks ago I couldn't type. I thought this will be interesting, because when you want to do something new and do something that you haven't done to get a result that you haven't had before, you've got to be brave, and you've got to be prepared to look like an idiot, and you've got to put your pride aside, and that's easier said than done. I got 12 calls in the first 2 hours, because I put it up at 7 a.m. in the morning, and all the cars that went up Canberra-Weston Parkway, they rang me and they said, we want to come to this Internet for Beginners course. I said, yeah. They said, how much is it? And I said, $60. They said, when is it? And I said, Saturday morning. They said, whereabouts? And I said, I'm just operating for a home. It's a lot more personal service. Okay. I have one computer, one modem, and 12 chairs in my lounge room in Canberra. And they came in and I said, this is a very limited course. You saw the sign, it's Internet for Beginners, so do not ask me any questions outside of that or you'll distract the class. They said, what about web pages? I said, no. So all I did, without a word of a lie, is I turned the computer on, which I knew how to do. I couldn't type. And all I showed them was how to stop the modem from dropping out and how to send and receive an email and open Netscape Navigator 1. That was it. That was the course. And they said, but what if it drops out? And I said, well, what you do is you open this box and you adjust this, it was a Mac, PPP rate, data rate. I said, phew, this guy knows what he's talking about. And if you turn it down lower, the speed will be slower, but it'll stay connected longer. I said, oh, God, that's useful information. Yeah. Anyway, they loved it. Absolutely loved it. I was working as in charge of family counselling at the YMCA with another guy, my colleague Tarek. And I thought, wow. And I put my $800 in my pocket, and I was like, wow. I wonder if I put another sign up on Canberra-Weston Parkway, I'd get another 12 people. Anyway, 3 weeks later, I resigned from the YMCA. I was doing about 15, 18 people a week out of my lounge room in Canberra. But as a systems thinker, you've just got to be curious about everything. And Peter, one of the agents from the Edge Group's here today, and he's very familiar with this sort of way of thinking. You know, oh, I think maybe what I should do, I could probably ring this guy, but what would I say? No, just pick up the phone and ring. No, but I need to make a plan of what you'd say if you... No, just pick the phone up and ring and make it up as you go. What you've got to do if you want to succeed is have a multitude of failures as fast as you possibly can in the fastest period of time that doesn't make you go broke. As quickly as possible. Have really thick skin. Just pick it up and talk. So I saw an ad in the paper, so I've been running these courses for... This actually shows you, you know, you talk about, and it was really thrilling to hear Chris talk about the one-page business plan, but I'm the one-idea business plan person. It's a way of being, about being resourceful and being opportunistic and having thick skin and putting your pride aside. One person on Canberra-Weston Parkway, as I was putting a sign up, yelled out, "Wanker!" 15 months later, I sold that business for over $1 million, listed on the stock exchange. But we'll get to that. So I saw an ad in the paper and it said, discount internet, buy it for all this rate. I thought, well, I wonder how they're doing that. But a systems thinker doesn't go, I wonder how they're doing that. Maybe I could go. So I just picked up the phone and I rang the number. I said, can I speak to your manager? He's not here. I said, can you get him to ring me back? He rang me back 20 minutes later. And I said, look, I'm really curious. Isn't it funny how if you ask people that are good at something about how they do it, they'll just tell you. They'll tell you everything. You go and do these courses and you do this training, pick someone that's getting the results that you want and ring them up and say, I'm so impressed with how you've managed to do that, can we have a coffee? Everybody likes to talk about what they're good at. They'll tell you all their secrets. But you don't do that. And you know how when you're with your friends and you've got an idea and you share the idea with them and they're giving you their opinion? Do not listen to them. Only listen to people that are getting the results that you want. I had a young guy recently that I'm mentoring who's got a car detailing business. He said he went to this breakfast, a business breakfast, and he said everyone around the table, he's 23, this guy. He's got one of the most successful car detailing businesses. We helped set it up in a certain business model. He said everyone around the table was telling him, oh, you want to make sure when you do your agreement with your franchisees that what you put in the agreement that you can audit their books 3 times a year, because how are you going to know if you've got any money and blah, 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 and this is what you should do and that's what you should do. You know, he rang me and said, Steve, they gave me such a hard time like this. I said, Nathan, next time you go to the breakfast and you stand up and it's your turn to talk, just ask them a question. He said, what? I said, ask them how many of them when they were 23 had 4 franchisees paying them $15,000 a year each. Anyway, 3 weeks later he left that meeting. Don't spend your time with people that are not getting the results that you want. The guy rang me back from Melbourne. I asked him, I said, how are you doing that? He said, I'm buying these discount internet rates from Optus, I'm buying it from Telstra, I'm putting it together, I'm packaging it and I'm reselling it, I'm getting a buff. I said, that's really interesting. He said, what do you do? I said, I'm an internet trainer. I run internet for beginners school. I said, oh, really interesting. I said, we're branching out, we're going to do web pages as well. This is how I sold the business. If I hadn't made that call, I wouldn't have sold the business. I wouldn't have made $1 million in 15 months. 4 weeks later, he rang me back. He said, Steve, he said, I know he said, you're getting into web pages. I said, yep, absolutely. He said, well, we've just got the contract for the West Coast Eagles and Hawthorn to build their websites. He said, can you do that? I said, absolutely. I said, we can do that for you. I said, we can do that. He said, okay. So I hang up the phone. Systems thinking. Where can I go? Who would know? Where can I go right now? If I had to get up, if someone had to get up and had to leave the house right now, where would I drive? Do I need to take an appointment? Forget the appointment, just go. Just go now, hop up and go. Where would you go? So I got my car, drove straight out to University of Canberra. Said, who's the dean of computer science? It's this guy. I said, so I knocked on his door. He said, well, who are you? I said, I just need to know, who are your 2 best programmers? I need people that got experience with the web that build web pages. He said, that'd be Ben and that'd be Terry. I said, when are they in next? He said, they're in at 5. So I sat in the car park waiting to come to school, accosted them on the car park, walking into class, said, guys, I've got a job for you. Pay you $40 an hour, I'm going to build some web pages, it's going to be really good for your resume, it's for the West Coast Eagles and Hawthorn football club. I said, okay, no worries. So we built the first websites for the West Coast Eagles and Hawthorn football club. So we're only a year in so far. So I've gone from putting out cardboard to building the websites because of a phone call, because that system's thinking. And I get a phone call, and this guy says, listen, did you build those websites for West Coast Eagles and Hawthorn Football Club? I said, yes. He said, well, I was just about to buy this business in Melbourne. And my partner, Hugh McClernand, who's the Crown Prosecutor for Western Australia, I thought, who are these guys? And they play with all these public companies on the BAW Rich 200 list, about number 17. He said, Hugh actually put a bit of pressure on him. He said, listen, it's all of this work yours. I said, no, the guy from Canberra built the bloody websites. He said, so I'm interested in your business. I said, my business is like 14 months old. He said, no, I'm interested. I thought it was a joke. He said, go to the airport tomorrow, business class tickets, come over to Perth. So I fly, I go, oh, yes, I go. There's tickets up. Okay. Fly over to Perth. He lives at Peppermint Grove, this guy. I don't know if you know where that is in Perth. Picks me up on his boat in Swan River, one of those Monte Carlo cruises, takes me out to Rottnest Island, buys me lunch, with the Crown Prosecutor of Western Australia beside me. Remember, 16 months ago, I was family counselling for YMCA. So, do you want to buy your business? Thinking somewhere between 700,000 and 1.5 million. And I was like, I bought it for $2. 2 $1 shares. But I kept a straight face because I had sat in front of over 1,000 people in family council. I said, that is a good offer, but I'm going to need to think about it. Anyway, I'm on the plane on the way home going, oh my God, how did this happen? Anyway, they bought the business. It was the first listed IT company in the ACT. They got listed on the stock exchange, backdoor listed. It was the time that the F. Capardises sold Dynamite Internet in the late 90s. But that whole go to woe took about 17 months. So that way of being, that way of putting your pride aside and being opportunistic and following up. I can tell you something really strange as well. If I'd went and got a degree in computer science, I never would have done that. Wouldn't have happened. Because I would have been so busy planning and ruling out the reasons why I couldn't do it, it never would have happened. Never would have happened. So I did that for a couple of years, and then because I could afford to, because the shares were trading up, I actually stayed at home with my daughter for 5 years. So from the time that she was 6 months old, and my wife at the time went back to work. And so that was an absolute blessing. So if you wanted to have a training, a non-university training for business, could you get anything better than first having to develop your communication skills to a level where You could talk to people in real time and sit back and sit outside of it and try and work out what was really going on. And then get exposed to the most powerful business people in the country, who actually end up getting me to review probably 150 companies that they're going to buy, information technology companies. We actually reviewed the retractable syringe company, which they invested in, that's in the marketplace. I was actually on the panel that reviewed that as well in Western Australia. So that's that. Real estate. I suppose what I've really tried to do today is just to put some context around it, to wrap up. If what you want's over here, the first thing you need to do, as Chris says, you really need to define what it is that you want. And it's because we all think we know that we want, but I'll finish with a really simple counselling analogy, and that is that I've been in counselling with people, and I have couples that are on the verge of actually breaking up. And they say, we don't understand it because we've got the same values. We value family and financial independence and things like that. And I'm nodding at that. And I said, well, do you mind if I explore that a little bit? Yes, please go ahead, Steve. Well, you claim that you both value family. I'm curious, and this is a really million-dollar question. When you're getting close to that value of family, what's happening? What are you doing? How are you behaving? Who are you with? Where are you going? And she said, well, as long as we're visiting my sister and my mum every weekend, and we get together at Easter, Christmas, and we have at least one family holiday together. I said, right. And I said, John, when are you closest to that value of family? He said, well, if I can see my brother once a year, he said, I'm happy. But they've never had that discussion. So even though you can claim that you both want the same thing, the rules for how you get to the target can be very, very different. I mean, I said to them, they said, oh, we both really value being deeply in love. I said, oh, that's good. I said, Debbie, when do you feel most loved from John? And she said, oh, this is a classic. She said, oh, actually, like when I come into the bathroom and he's put the toothpaste on the toothbrush for me, it just makes me melt. And he goes. And I said, John, when you closest, because you like this love thing, when you feel deeply closest to Debbie, what's actually happening? And he says, I've got to be honest, when I go and she's, it's sexist, but when my shirt's ironed and I reach up and I can smell that Omo Cold Power on it, which is my favourite wash, and I get that smell, I just think, oh, I love her, she's such a great person. And I said, did you know that about each other? I said, no. I said, we've got a pretty good recipe now if you want to make the other person feel loved. Isn't that insane? And these people are on the verge of breaking up. How that all relates to business is it absolutely relates to business. Often the reason that we don't get more of what we want is that we're not brave enough to actually try new things. That capacity to actually try new things and to be innovative. I mean, that was how I built the real estate business from nothing. I had no background in real estate. It didn't work for anybody. I just went right through and got a diploma. I've never been to a real estate conference. We've got people from Ray White, Independent Property Group, Rain and Horn, LJ Hookers, that are just joining us now, which is another story. So I think I'll finish there. I think I've well and truly gone over time. I'm not sure how that came out after getting to bed at 3 a.m. nursing my father last night, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And Peter Brentnell is there. He's one of the Edge agents. I'm sure he could probably, if you've got any questions, he'd be happy to answer as well. But yeah, if there's any questions at all or any insights you want me to expand on, I'm absolutely more than happy to do it. And I hope you found that at least interesting.
Thank you so much, Steve. So Amy, over to you with questions.
No questions? Any questions?
Thank you for coming here after such a rough night in hospital.
That's
I've
okay.
been in with the Sun recently and they're just so understaffed. What I really loved was how you included the personal in your presentation. How important is it in business to keep the personal in mind? Because often, most business consultants, they just don't even go there with your personal life.
Yeah, look, that's a really good question. The answer is very, very important, and Peter will attest to this. One of the things that we do, and one of the ways in which we engage people, is that, and one of my favourite sayings is that there's great power in being humble when you're with people, and there's nothing wrong with divulging the right amount of personal information to people, because we're all human, and I think sometimes you get so caught up in appealing to be what's professional that you lose sight of that personal connection. And one of the things that the people in Edge are trained in is, I say to them, there's no scripts and there's no sales training and there's none of that. And they said, well, what's our job? And I said, your job is to say something that means something to the person that you're with. And if you're a systems thinker, you think about that. That's actually, it's a simple statement. It's a very powerful statement. You've got to say something that means something to the person that you're with. If nothing demonstrates more that business of where would I go, what would I do, who would know, how can I get started right now, I've got to stand up right now, I've got to do something, who can I role model that's getting the results they want, how can I approach them, that sort of thinking on turbo like that, what it does is it actually speeds up time. You make all those mistakes sooner. And the definition of what an entrepreneur is someone that does that really, really fast and doesn't go broke. So you're doing it, how can I do it in the way, you see what I did? Did I go and pay all of this money? Because what happens when you think you've got an idea with business is, where can I lease a place to set up my training? Can you see that? You're dead in the water before you start. Because I've got no costs. My costs for my real estate business are $2,000 a year. Insurance and my licence fee. My business turns over well over $1 million a year, and my costs are fixed at $2,000 a year. My licence fees and my insurance, because we operate from home. But I've operated from home since 2009, and if you go back to 2009 or 11 and see what was happening, it was about the start of 3G. How can I operate? You'll get a hang of this. How can I operate from home? How can I minimise my costs? How can I do it in a way that nobody else is doing? How can I still do it that way and be taken seriously and credibility? 3G came out on mobile phones. It meant that you could send a 400-page document on your phone. And I knew what that meant. Because I answered the question that I'd asked with intensity. How can I operate from home? Or how can I minimise my costs and do it in a way that I've still got a really high public profile? The power of questions are everything. Like it's another trainer, I went to his course, and he says that, how do you put meaning to your experience? What you've just done is you've asked yourself a question. The way you put meaning to your experience is you're asking yourself questions all the time. I know of two brothers and their father abused them, and one finished up being an airline pilot and the other was in jail. And we interviewed them. And said, how did that possibly work out that way? So how could it work out any differently with a father like that? And we asked the other guy. He said, well, how could it work out that we did anything else other than be successful after watching him do that? The way that you put meaning to your experience is by asking yourself questions. So those questions that I'm trained to ask are designed to bring the best out of yourself. I don't indulge in the luxury of saying, oh, why wouldn't it work and what did I do wrong? Maybe for 0.5% of the time. The other 99% of the time is, where can I go? Who would know? What can I do right now? How can I get started? What would I do if I wasn't scared? How would I behave if I hadn't? How would I behave if I'd done this before? How are the people behaving that do this already behaving? What do they look like? Where do they go? Who are they socialising with? How can I get to do that with them now? I don't know. No, you've got to ask it. No, you've got to make it. You've got to gun it and you've got to work it out. If you ask it with enough intensity, you'll get the answer. It's true. It's actually true. And what actually happens, switching back to some psychology, is that if you do that regularly, there's absolutely physiological evidence that the neural pathways in your brain ways that are responsible for that opportunism and that seeking of answers and success, they actually are stronger. They can scan your brain and see that those neural pathways in your brain actually grow the more you use them. That's how people get to be manically depressed. They run the other story. What's wrong with me? How does it happen? I've been in counselling with manic depressants, and I've actually said to them, They said, you don't understand, this happened and that happened and this happened. They said, if you just listen to me. I said, you're right, you're 100% right. If I listen to you, which I'm going to do, and I did it every day forever, I would feel exactly like you feel. The way you put meanings to your experience is the questions you ask. If you can take that and apply it to business, and part of that, it's not being selfish to not listen to everybody. You're not being a better business person by listening to everybody. The problem with the world today is there's so much bloody information, it's hard to know what to pay attention to. So you've got to role model the people that are getting the results that you want. You've got to be opportunistic as hell. You've got to actually know what it is that you want. Those stories from counselling about toothpaste. Imagine them being in a relationship and not knowing that about each other. And now they've got a recipe. He knows if she's in a bad mood, that day's the absolute day that you should put the toothpaste on the tooth. How crazy is that? But it's true. Communication is everything. You get paid directly relative to your capacity to communicate with people and influence them. Ethically. Ethically. That was a very long answer to your question. I should wrap up. But I hope it was interesting. So yeah, were there any other questions or?
Oh, can I? Some of these are questions, some of these are comments. Look, Steve, I've never met Steve before, but I agree 100% with all that you've said there. Look, his world is real estate, my world is funerals for the last 30 years, and every word he's spoken today overlaps with my world. Communicate, and certainly make sure you're enjoying yourself too. I think or whatever you're doing should be rewarding. And so look, thanks. Yeah, this isn't a thank you, but I just wanted to. I was sitting here thinking, well, there's a real estate agent talking about how to run a good business. I mean, I've had numerous businesses, but everything that was said overlaps with my world, which is a totally different world to his. One comment I had to make was I sold a business years ago where I got 3 times the money I thought I was going to get for it. And I realised after that day, for anyone who's got a partner or is selling a business, ask the person how much they want before you make a ridiculous offer. I know that undoes Steve's good work there, but I remember that day, look, I was on the receiving end where I got the money, as with Steve, but I learnt that day that before I make any offers for any businesses, ask them how much they want, because you may find you can save yourself a few dollars. But look, it undoes some of Steve's good hard work there. But as I say, that was a comment as much as a question.
Yeah. No, look, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. And I'm obviously also very happy to, if anyone ever wants to meet for a coffee or something like that. I know I'm fairly passionate about things, but that's how I choose to live, because what's the alternative? But I'm absolutely happy to meet up with anybody and have a coffee and discuss things. I mean, I have been involved in several other businesses that I've invested in and things like that as well. And I'm about to launch an IT business, which is out of this world, so to speak, as well. So, but yeah, happy to catch up, happy to have a coffee. Thank you very much for your time. Cheers.